The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, and it smelled like money. Heavy cream paper, a wax seal pressed so deep you could feel the ridge with your thumb. Vivian Calloway had seen enough of these letters to know exactly what they meant. Not just wealth, old wealth, the kind that didn't ask, the kind that simply summoned. The Duke of Weston requests the services of Miss Calloway for the creation of a wedding gown for Lady Cecily Weston. You are expected at Weston House, Mayfair, this Friday at 10 o'clock. No please, no if it suits you, just expected. Vivian looked around her little shop. 3 unfinished dresses on their frames. A hole in the ceiling she still hadn't fixed. 4 pounds in the tin under the floorboard. She picked the letter back up. She'd be there Friday at 9:55. Friday morning was gray and cold, the way London always was in October. She dressed carefully, not to impress, but so nobody could dismiss her before she opened her mouth. Dark wool coat, old but well kept. Hair pinned back neat. Her mother's old leather case with the brass clasp. She walked all the way from Clerkenwell to Mayfair. She wasn't spending 6pence on a cab. Weston House sat at the end of the street like it owned the whole road, which it probably did. 4 stories of white stone, tall windows, iron gates standing open like they were doing you a favor just by letting you look at them. A footman appeared from the side, the way they always did, out of nowhere, slightly offended by your existence. Tradespeople use the service entrance, he said, around the back. Vivian looked at him, then at the front door, then back at him. I don't think so, she said, nicely, very nicely. And she walked straight up the front steps. The butler who opened the door had the face of a man who had seen everything and been impressed by none of it. Miss Calloway, she said before he could speak, I have an appointment, 10 o'clock. A pause, the kind meant to make you feel small. Vivian smiled and waited. This way, he said. The entrance hall was enormous, black and white marble floors, a chandelier that probably cost more than her entire street, portraits of serious men on every wall, all of them mildly disappointed in the world. She was studying the lapels on one of the portraits, really beautiful lapels, when she heard footsteps on the staircase, slow, unhurried. The footsteps of a man who had never once rushed for anything because nothing had ever dared leave without him. She didn't look up right away. She was still thinking about those lapels. Then the butler did that thing, that tiny, barely there straightening of the spine, and Vivian understood. She turned. He was halfway down the stairs. Tall. Dark coat, no cravat yet. Hair still slightly undone. She'd caught him before he was fully assembled for the day. His face might have been handsome if it weren't working so hard at being cold. He looked at her the way people in houses like this looked at people like her. Not cruel, exactly. Just indifferent. Like she was furniture, a minor inconvenience in the layout of the room. He looked past her at his butler. The seamstress? He said. Not Miss Calloway, just the seamstress, like a category, like something to be filed away and forgotten. And the Duke of Weston walked right past her, toward the back of the house. No nod, no word. She might as well have been one of the coat stands by the door. Vivian watched him go. Then she turned back to the butler, perfectly calm. Lady Cecily? She said. Right this way, miss. She followed him up the stairs, one hand on the banister, chin up. She had been dismissed by men like that before. She was still here. They were not. Lady Cecily Weston was nothing like her brother. Where he was cold, she was warm. All bright eyes and nervous energy, already talking before Vivian had set her case down. Oh, I'm so glad you're here. I've been absolutely dreading this. Not you, I mean the whole process. Everyone keeps telling me what I should want, and nobody's actually asked me what I... She stopped, laughed a little. Sorry, I talk too much when I'm anxious. Talk as much as you like, Vivian said, clicking open her case. It helps me understand what you actually want instead of what everyone else thinks you should have. Cecily blinked. then smiled, a real one, not the practiced kind. "I think I'm going to like you," she said. "Most people do," Vivian said, pulling out her measuring tape. "Eventually." Cecily was petite, fine-boned, with quiet opinions she offered up like she wasn't sure she was allowed to have them. "I've always loved simple lines. Is that terrible? I don't want to look like a cake." And every time Vivian told her no, that was actually exactly right, Cecily seemed genuinely surprised, like nobody had agreed with her in a while. Vivian was pinning ivory silk across Cecily's shoulders when the door opened. She didn't have to look up. She could tell by the way Cecily's posture changed, just slightly, a little stilling. "You're using ivory," the Duke said. "I am. White is traditional. White washes out her complexion." She looked up. He was in the doorway, arms crossed, looking at the fabric like it had personally offended him. "Ivory is warmer." "I wasn't aware seamstresses made those decisions." "Then you haven't worked with a good one before." She turned back to Cecily. "Arms out a little, please." He didn't leave, he just stayed, leaning against the doorframe with that expression, not quite a frown, not quite boredom, somewhere in between. Vivian ignored him with the focused discipline of a woman who had been ignoring difficult men her entire life. It worked for about 20 minutes. "The neckline is too low," he said. Vivian looked at the neckline. It was not too low, it was quite modest. She looked at Cecily, who gave the tiniest, helpless shrug. "Lady Cecily," Vivian said, pleasantly but very clearly, "is standing right here and is capable of telling me herself if she'd like a change." Cecily made a small sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. She turned it into a cough. This went on for the better part of an hour. The trim, the sleeve length, the train, every choice Vivian made, he had something to say, never outright rude, but always there, always questioning, like a stone in your shoe you couldn't quite shake out. Vivian answered every comment, calmly, directly, firmly enough to make clear she wasn't moving. She could tell it was getting to him, not because he raised his voice, but there was a tightness around his jaw that hadn't been there at the start, and the indifference in his expression had shifted into something more like frustration, which, in Vivian's experience, was what happened to men like him when they realized a conversation wasn't going the way they'd planned. She pinned the last corner of the silk and stepped back. "There," she said, "that's the dress." Cecily looked at herself in the mirror, and her whole face changed. "Oh," she said softly. "Oh, yes, that's it exactly." Vivian smiled. That moment, that exact moment, was why she did this job. Then the Duke spoke. "You are very sure of yourself," he said, "for a seamstress." Vivian turned around slowly. There it was. She'd been waiting for it. Men like him always got there eventually. When the quiet dismissals didn't work, when the interruptions didn't work, they reached for the thing they thought would finally put you in your place. She looked at him. He looked back, perfectly composed, certain he'd landed the blow. "And you," Vivian said, keeping her voice very light, "are just a title, Your Grace." The room went completely still. Cecily stopped breathing. The lady's maid in the corner suddenly found the wall extremely interesting. The Duke stared at her. Vivian held his gaze without blinking, without any of the apology he was clearly waiting for. Then she turned back to Cecily and began carefully removing the pins from the silk. "I'll have the first sketches ready by Monday," she said in her normal voice, like nothing had happened at all. "We should talk about the veil." Cecily pulled herself together in about 4 seconds. "Yes," she said, a little breathlessly. "Yes, let's." The Duke stood there a moment longer. Then he left. No word, no slam of the door, just footsteps down the hall, slow and deliberate, fading away. Vivian kept her eyes on the silk in her hands, but in the mirror, just for a second, she caught Cecily looking at her with an expression that was equal parts shock and absolute delight. She allowed herself one small smile, just one. By the second visit, Cecily was saving her the good chair. Not the stiff-backed one by the window meant for formal guests, the soft one, near the fireplace, with the worn armrest that meant somebody actually used it. Vivian noticed these things. She noticed most things. This was how it had started. Small things. Cecily remembering how Vivian took her tea, Vivian remembering that Cecily hated long sleeves because they made her feel trapped. Little exchanges that had nothing to do with the dress and everything to do with two women simply getting on. Vivian hadn't expected it. She didn't usually get attached to clients, but there was something about Cecily, that mix of brightness and uncertainty, like a person who'd been told so many times to be quieter that she'd half believed it, that made Vivian want to stay a while. So she did. They were going over ribbon samples, spread across the bed in a mess of ivory and blush and pale gold, when Cecily said, out of nowhere, "He wasn't always like that, you know." Vivian looked up. She didn't ask who. They both knew who. James. He used to be different. He laughed more. Then there was a woman. Cecily picked up a ribbon, rubbed it between her fingers. Her name was Charlotte. They were together nearly 2 years. Everyone assumed they'd marry, but her family didn't approve. Old rumors about ours, the kind that get passed around at dinner parties until everyone believes them. Charlotte's mother told her she'd be ruined by association, so Charlotte ended it, wrote him a letter, and left for the countryside the same week. "How long ago?" asked Vivian. 4 years. Cecily set the ribbon down. He goes to the dinners, does all the things he's supposed to do, but he's just not there anymore. Not really. She gave a small, sad smile. So when he's difficult with you, it's not personal. It's more that he doesn't trust anyone anymore. He doesn't need to trust me. He just needs to let me do my job. Cecily laughed, a real one. They went back to the ribbons. Vivian held the pale gold up against the ivory silk and something clicked. The right warmth, the right weight. "This one," she said. Cecily's face lit up. That sudden lighting, like she'd been waiting for someone to just decide something on her behalf for once. "Perfect," she said. Then softer, "I really am glad James hired you." "He didn't hire me," Vivian said pleasantly. "He summoned me. There's a difference." Cecily laughed. Then the laughter faded, just a little, just at the edges. Vivian noticed. "Is everything all right with the wedding?" A pause, too long for yes. "Of course," Cecily said, bright voice, practiced smile. Vivian had spent her whole life watching women say, "of course," when they meant absolutely not. She didn't push, she just waited, letting the silence do the work. Cecily lasted about 30 seconds. "Last Thursday, I sent a note to Robert, Lord Ashby, about the rehearsal dinner. His man came back and said he was at his club." She stopped. "But I'd seen him that morning. He said he was going to his estate in Hampshire for the week." "So he lied," Vivian said, simply. "People forget things," Cecily said quickly. "Plans change. He probably—" "Cecily." She stopped. Her hands were folded very tightly in her lap. "I asked around," she said, barely above a whisper. "Apparently, Lord Ashby has been seen, rather regularly, with a Miss Hartwell, in circumstances that would not be considered. They say there was an understanding between them before he and I were introduced." The fire popped. A clock ticked somewhere down the hall. An understanding. That was the word they used when they meant a promise, when they meant something that looked very much like an engagement, just without the announcement. "Does your brother know?" Vivian asked. "No." Fast, certain. "I don't know what to do with it. Maybe it's gossip. Maybe it's nothing. I'm getting married in 8 weeks, Vivian." What Vivian actually thought was, Robert Ashby is standing at an altar with 2 women and only one of them knows it. She thought it. She didn't say it. "We'll keep working on the dress," Vivian said, "and we'll figure the rest out." It wasn't much, but Cecily nodded like it was enough for now. Neither of them noticed the door. It was open, just a crack, the way doors sometimes were in big houses, left unlatched and never quite closed again, enough for someone in the hallway to hear the shape of a conversation. The Duke of Weston stood very still on the other side of it. He hadn't meant to stop. He'd been passing, that was all. And then he'd heard Cecily's voice, too quiet, too careful, and his feet had simply stopped moving. He hadn't caught everything, just fragments. Lord Ashby, Miss Hartwell, an understanding. And Vivian's voice, low and steady, "We'll figure the rest out." We. When had this woman become we with his sister? He didn't know what Vivian Calloway wanted from this house, what a seamstress from Clerkenwell thought she was doing making herself indispensable to a duke's family, but he was going to find out. He walked away from the door, slowly, quietly, the way he did everything. Vivian hadn't meant to stay so late, but the beading on the bodice was fiddly work, the kind that couldn't be rushed, the kind where one crooked stitch ruined 3 others, and by the time she looked up, it wasn't evening anymore. It was properly, thoroughly night. Weston House at midnight was a different place entirely. During the day it hummed, servants, footsteps, distant clatter. Now just silence and the occasional groan of old walls. The fire had burned down to embers. Her candle was nearly gone. She needed light. Cecily had mentioned the library once. 2nd floor, end of the east wing. James keeps it warm because he's always in there. Vivian figured a library would have candles. Libraries always had candles. The door was slightly ajar, a thin line of warm light underneath it. She pushed it open. The fire was very much alive, properly stacked, properly burning. The man in the armchair was not expecting her. No jacket, shirt sleeves, collar open, a book face down in his lap. His head was leaning back, eyes closed, one hand resting loosely over the cover. For a strange, suspended moment, Vivian just looked at him. He looked different like this, without the coat, without the expression he wore like armor, younger almost. The hard line of his jaw was the same, but everything else had softened, just enough. Then his eyes opened. They looked at each other. Miss Calloway. His voice was different too, lower, the careful social polish worn off at the edges. "Your Grace, I held up my dying candle. I needed light. I'll go." "The candles are on the 2nd shelf, left side." She found them, lit one from the fire, and then, because the fire was warm and her fingers were cold from hours of beating, and she was frankly tired, she sat down, the chair at a reasonable distance, on the other side of the fireplace. He watched all of this without comment. The silence between them was different from the silences during the day. Those had been loaded, full of quiet battles. This one was just quiet. The fire talked. The house breathed. "You work late," he said. "The beading on the bodice, it needs attention. You could finish it at your own shop. Better light here, quieter." She expected something pointed. He said instead, "Do you always do the beading yourself?" It sounded like genuine curiosity. "For important pieces, yes," she said. "I don't trust anyone else with it." "Why not?" "Because it matters." Simply, without emphasis. "The bride wears this once. She remembers it her whole life. Every stitch matters." He was quiet, turning her over in his mind the way he did, like a problem he was trying to find the angle of. "That's not how most people in your trade think," she said. "I'm not most people." "No," he said, and there was something in his voice she couldn't quite name. "You're not." She should have taken her candle and said goodnight. Instead, she said, "Cecily told me about Charlotte." She felt him go still. Not visibly, but something in the room changed. "She wasn't gossiping," Vivian said, eyes on the fire. "She wanted me to understand." A long pause. "And do you?" "Quiet, not angry, just careful." "I understand that someone let you down," she said, "and that it changed things." "It didn't change things," he said. "It clarified them." She looked at him, staring at the fire, jaw tight, but his voice was not bitter. Matter of fact, like a man who had made peace with something by deciding it wasn't worth fighting. What did it clarify? He glanced at her, a flicker of surprise that she'd pushed. That people will always choose what protects them, in the end, whatever they say before the end. "That's not wrong," Vivian said. He raised an eyebrow. He'd clearly expected disagreement. "People do protect themselves. Most people." She looked back at the fire. "My mother didn't." She hadn't meant to say that. It just came out, the way things did late at night in warm rooms when your guard had been down for a while. He didn't push. He just waited. Which was, she was beginning to understand, what he did when he was actually listening. She was a seamstress too. Actually, she was better than me. She could look at a piece of fabric and just know what it wanted to be. She paused. "She died when I was 19. Fever. Very fast. She left me the shop, the tools, and her sewing machine, this old iron thing that weighs about as much as a small horse." Something moved across his face. Not pity, something quieter than that. "Do you still use it?" he asked. "Every day." A silence, a good one. "And your father?" Vivian's hands went very still. She'd always had her answer ready, the clean, easy one that didn't require follow-up. "I don't know," she said. Which was true. It was just not all of the truth. She felt his eyes on her face. Whatever he saw there made him not ask the next question. He had the intelligence, she was realizing, to know when a door was closed. He looked back at the fire. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "about your mother." 3 words, no fuss, no performance. Vivian looked at him, really looked at him for the first time, without either of them trying to win something. "Thank you," she said. The fire burned. The clock on the mantel ticked. Neither of them moved for a while. She left 20 minutes later, candle in hand, shoes quiet on the marble floor. Walking back through the dark house, she noticed something that hadn't been there when she arrived. She couldn't quite remember when, in the past hour, she had stopped wanting to leave. It was Cecily's idea. Or rather, it was presented as Cecily's idea, which Vivian was fairly certain meant it had actually been someone else's suggestion entirely. The fabric samples needed a final approval in natural light. Lady Pembroke's Thursday afternoon tea happened to fall at the right time. Lady Pembroke happened to have a south-facing drawing room with excellent windows. And so, somehow, Vivian found herself in a carriage with Cecily and the Duke of Weston, heading to Mayfair with a leather case full of fabric samples on her lap. "It's just a small gathering," Cecily said, in the tone of someone who knew perfectly well it wasn't. Across from her, the Duke looked out the window and said nothing. Just look at the fabric, do the job, go home. Lady Pembroke's house was not small. Neither was the gathering. The drawing room was full, 20 women at least, arranged in careful clusters with their teacups and their careful smiles, all of them turning as one when Vivian walked in behind Cecily. She felt it immediately, that shift in the air, eyes moving over her, coat, case, face, and then moving to each other with the small, quick language of women who had known each other for years. Lady Cecily, a woman materialized from the left, tall, somewhere in her 50s, the kind of face that had been beautiful once and had since decided to become formidable instead. Lady Pembroke, Cecily smiled. "Thank you so much for having us." Lady Pembroke's eyes moved to Vivian, moved over her, moved away. "And you've brought your seamstress. The word landed the way it was meant to. Not quite an insult, just a category, a reminder. "Miss Calloway," Cecily said warmly, "she's making my gown." "How practical," Lady Pembroke said, and turned back to Cecily. The fabric approval took 10 minutes. The south-facing windows were excellent. Vivian could see immediately that the ivory was right, that the pale gold trim would catch beautifully, that every choice she'd made in the dim sewing room held up perfectly in the sun. She was making a note in her small book when she became aware that someone was standing very close behind her. 3 women, 40s, expensively dressed, wearing the particular expression of people who had decided to enjoy themselves at someone else's expense. "Is that the seamstress?" one of them said, to her companion, not to Vivian, about Vivian, while standing directly in front of Vivian. "She came through the front door," said the third, with a small laugh. Vivian closed her notebook, looked at them pleasantly, said nothing. This seemed to bother them more than anything she could have said. The first one leaned in slightly. "Do you find it strange coming to these sorts of gatherings?" "I find it useful," Vivian said. "The light is excellent." "I suppose one has to go where the work is." "One does," Vivian agreed, perfectly cheerful. She turned back to her samples. She thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. 20 minutes later, waiting for Cecily near the window, she heard a voice, loud enough to carry, quiet enough to deny. "I simply don't understand why they're brought to these things at all." Vivian went still. "Tradespeople." The voice belonged to an older woman, heavy silk dress, a small fortune in pearls, the countess of something. "Everyone is too polite to say anything, but there's a reason these things have always been done a certain way, certain rooms for certain people. It's not cruelty, it's just—" a small, satisfied pause. "Order." "Don't. Just don't. 30 more minutes and you're in the carriage." But then the Countess turned, looked directly at her, and said, clearly, loud enough that the 3 nearest conversations went quiet, "Why exactly are these people let in?" Not she, not even the seamstress, these people. The room held its breath. Vivian turned around slowly. She had her answer ready. She always had her answer ready. Something clean and sharp that would make the point without giving anyone the satisfaction of seeing her rattled. She opened her mouth, and then a voice came from her left. "Because I invited her." She hadn't heard him come up beside her. The Duke of Weston stood perhaps 2 feet away, hands clasped behind his back, looking at the Countess with an expression of absolute, glacial calm. Every head in the room had turned. "Your Grace, I simply meant—" "I know what you meant, Lady Ashworth." His voice was perfectly level, pleasant even. The pleasantness of a very cold place. "Miss Calloway is here at my request, working on a commission for my family. She came through the front door because that is how guests are received at Weston House." A pause, brief, precise, like a blade being set down on a table. "I was not aware your own house operated differently, though I confess I haven't paid close attention." Complete silence. "I meant no offense," Lady Ashworth said. "Of course not," the Duke said, with a smile that meant the opposite. "You never do." He turned away from her, cleanly, finally, the way you closed a book, and looked at Vivian. "Are we finished with the samples?" Normal voice, like nothing had happened. Vivian looked at him. She had been handling rooms like this her whole life. She had her answers, her defenses, her quiet dignities. She had never, in 20 years of walking into houses she wasn't quite welcomed into, had someone step in front of her like that. She didn't know what to do with it. "Yes," she said. "We're finished." In the carriage on the way back, Cecily talked, something about the curtains in Lady Pembroke's drawing room, and Vivian watched London pass outside the window and said very little. The Duke sat across from her, looking out the window, saying nothing. Once, and only once, she glanced at him. He was already looking at her. Neither of them said anything. He turned back to the window. Vivian looked down at the case on her lap and tried to organize her thoughts into something sensible. She couldn't quite manage it. She didn't sleep well that night. It wasn't Lady Ashworth's face she kept seeing when she closed her eyes. It wasn't the drawing room or the silence or the careful cruelty of women with too much time and too little opposition. It was him, because I invited her. She understood people. She'd made a quiet study of them her whole life. She understood Lady Ashworth. She understood Cecily. She even understood the Duke's coldness, his walls, his careful distances. What she did not understand was why he had stepped forward in that drawing room. There was no benefit in it, no social advantage. If anything, it had cost him something. So why? She gave up on sleep around 2 a.m, wrapped herself in her mother's old shawl, and went downstairs to the shop. The shop at night was its own kind of company. The dresses on their frames, the bolts of fabric, her mother's sewing machine sitting solid and heavy in the corner. She lit a candle and sat at her work table and didn't pick up a needle, which meant she was more unsettled than she'd admitted to herself. After a while, she reached under the table. A wooden box, the latch slightly bent from being dropped once and never fixed. She opened it once or twice a year when something pushed her toward it. Her mother's things. A small portrait, badly painted but recognizable. A ring with a chipped stone. A pair of gloves, unworn, the kind you kept for best and then never wore because best never quite arrived. And at the bottom, letters. 6, maybe 7, ordinary things mostly, and one that was different. She unfolded it. Her mother's handwriting, the particular slant of it, the letters leaning slightly right as if always in a hurry. My lord, I write to you for the last time, as I have written twice before without answer. I ask not for anything you are willing to give. I ask only that you know she exists. She is healthy. She's clever. She looks like... The sentence ended there, crossed out with a single firm line. She will want for nothing that I can provide. I ask for nothing in return, but I thought you should know. E.C. Calloway. No date. No address. It was a copy, Vivian had always assumed. A copy of something sent and never answered. But there was a name, at the very bottom, written in a different hand, darker ink, the handwriting of someone who had received this letter and noted the name for their own records. Lord Aldrich Beaumont. Vivian had looked at that name before and set it aside. Tonight, something was different. The past few weeks had shifted something in her, made her less willing to leave questions unanswered. She went to the small bookshelf at the back of the shop, found the Directory of the Peerage, 8 years old, slightly out of date, but thorough. Beaumont, Aldrich Francis, Baron of Wenthrop, born 1891. A handwritten note beside the entry, struck from Society 1836, scandal, financial, whereabouts unknown. Vivian had been 14 in 1836. She turned 2 pages back to the family trees. House of Beaumont, legitimate issue, none recorded. She sat back. If her mother's letter meant what she had always half suspected it meant, then Vivian was not legitimate issue. But she was still issue. And in certain corners of the law, in certain interpretations of the old statutes governing title and blood, that still meant something. She will want for nothing that I can provide. Her mother had never told her, had carried this her whole life alone, built a shop and a livelihood from absolutely nothing, and had never once suggested there was another story available, a different door, a name that wasn't Calloway. Vivian sat with that for a long time. Then she closed the book, folded the letter back into the box, and latched it shut. She brought it up the next afternoon. Not intentionally, or not entirely. Cecily had been called away briefly, and Vivian found herself alone in the sitting room when the Duke appeared in the doorway with a letter in his hand, looking for his sister and finding the wrong person instead. He stopped. "Cecily will be back shortly," Vivian said. He nodded, didn't leave, set the letter on the side table. He looked for a moment like he was going to say something about Thursday, and then clearly decided against it. "Do you know the name Beaumont?" Vivian said. She hadn't planned it. It came out the way the comment about her mother had in the library, sideways, unbidden, before she'd properly decided. She looked up, and she saw it. Small, very small, the kind of change you'd miss if you weren't watching carefully. A stillness that came over him too fast, a flicker behind his eyes, a fraction of a second where the careful, composed face of the Duke of Weston was replaced by something unguarded and a little raw. He knew the name. "Where did you hear that?" His voice was almost perfectly level. "Old correspondence," she said carefully. "Lord Aldrich Beaumont. I wondered if you knew of him." He was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen before. Not the hostility of the early days, not the thaw in the library. Like a man reassessing a situation he thought he'd understood. "Why are you asking me?" he said. "Because you reacted just now," she said simply, "when I said the name." A pause. Longer this time. "Beaumont was known to my family," he said, peripherally, a long time ago. He looked at her steadily. "Why does a seamstress from Clerkenwell have correspondence involving Aldrich Beaumont?" Quiet, but pointed. "I'm not entirely sure yet," Vivian said, which was the most honest answer she had. He looked at her, that turning something over look, and she had the distinct feeling that whatever he knew about Beaumont was more than peripheral, and that he was deciding right now how much of it to say. Before he could say anything, Cecily's voice came from the hallway, bright and apologetic, and the moment closed. The Duke straightened, picked up his letter, looked at Vivian one last time. "Beaumont is a complicated subject," he said quietly. "I'd be careful where you take that name." Then Cecily came through the door and the room filled up again, and Vivian turned to her fabric samples and her pins and the ordinary business of the afternoon. But she felt his eyes on her back for a long time after. He came to find her. That was the thing she kept coming back to afterward, not the other way around. It was a Saturday, no fitting scheduled, but Vivienne had come anyway to finish the sleeve work, and Cecily had gone out for the afternoon, and the house was quiet in that particular weekend way. She'd been working about an hour when she heard footsteps in the corridor. Unhurried, deliberate. She knew those footsteps. He knocked, which she had never done before. "Come in," she said. He was in his riding clothes, still carrying a faint cold air quality about him, his hair slightly wind-blown, less assembled than usual. She was beginning to think she preferred him that way, which was information she kept very firmly to herself. "You asked about Beaumont," he said. "I did. I've been thinking about it since." He moved to the window, stood with his back to the glass, arms crossed, looking at the middle distance in the way he did when organizing his thoughts. "I'll tell you what I know, but I'd like to understand first, where did the correspondence come from?" Vivienne set down her needle. She still wasn't sure it was wise to say any of it to this man in particular, but she was increasingly sure it was necessary. "It was my mother's, a letter she wrote to Beaumont. She wanted him to know," she paused, "that I existed." The room was very quiet. He looked at her. She looked back. All the things that sentence implied sat between them in the air, unsaid, not needing to be said. "I don't know that it means what it seems to mean," she said. "I have a letter and a name, that's all." "But you think it means what it seems to mean." She said nothing, which was its own answer. "Sit down," she said. "Please, you're making me nervous standing there like that." He looked surprised that she'd said please. Then, slowly, he sat. "Tell me about him, Beaumont." His name was Aldrich Beaumont. He and my father were friends from boyhood, school, Cambridge, London, inseparable for about 20 years. He looked at his hands. My father made him sound remarkable, funny, generous, too clever for his own good. What happened? Money. Beaumont had debts built up over years. When they became impossible to ignore, my father could have helped him. He had the means, and Beaumont was his oldest friend. But there were social considerations. His position, the family name. He said family name in a tone that made clear what he thought of that reasoning. He didn't help him. Worse, the rumors about Beaumont's finances were already circulating, but my father didn't stop them. In certain company, he elaborated, added detail, the kind that closes doors permanently. A pause. Beaumont was finished within a year. He left London and never came back. How do you know this? My father told me. Not as a confession. He wasn't built for confession. He told me as a lesson. This is what happens when sentiment overrides sense. A quiet, humorless breath. I was 17. I understood even then that the lesson was actually about something else entirely. Vivian looked at him, at the set of his jaw and the thing behind his eyes that had been there since the first day. Not just coldness, she realized now, but something older, something sitting in him quietly for a long time. "You've been carrying that," she said. "It's not mine to carry. My father made his choices." "That's not what I asked." A long look. "Yes, I suppose I have." The silence that followed was different from the others. Not uncomfortable, just full, the way a room felt after something true had been said in it. "He never answered her letter," Vivian said. "My mother wrote 3 times, never got a response." "He may not have been in a position to respond after the scandal." He stopped. "Or he may have simply been a coward about it. I don't know which." "Neither do I." Then, carefully, "If you are who that letter suggests, Miss Calloway, if Beaumont was your father, then my family owes you something. My father's actions affected his life, which affected—" He paused. "There is a debt there." "I don't want your family's debt," she said, evenly. "That's not really— I am not a bill to be settled, Your Grace. Not sharp, just certain. Whatever happened between your father and Beaumont is not something I need you to fix. I have a shop, I have a trade. I have built everything I have with my own hands." He stared at her. She stared back. And then, slowly, starting somewhere around his eyes, he smiled. Not the controlled social smile she'd seen him use in drawing rooms. A real one. Small, surprised, like something had caught him off guard. Then, quietly, he laughed. Barely there, but real. Completely, unmistakably real. And it changed his whole face. Vivian found herself entirely unprepared for what that did to her composure. "I'm not sure anyone has ever told me my help is unwanted," he said. "I'm sure plenty of people have thought it. They were simply too polite. And you are not too polite. I am exactly polite enough. I have very precise calibration." He laughed again, just a breath of it, and shook his head, looking at her with that expression she still couldn't fully name. She wasn't sure exactly how it happened. She'd been reaching for the pincushion on the small table beside her, thinking about getting back to the sleeve. They'd been talking long enough. He leaned forward at the same moment, perhaps to stand. Their hands met on the arm of the chair. Not dramatically, not the way it happened in stories, just the simple, quiet fact of his hand and hers, an inch of contact, warm and entirely accidental. Neither of them moved. She should have pulled away. He should have pulled away. The correct thing was for one of them to move and for there to be a brief mutual pretense that it hadn't happened. Neither of them did the correct thing. When she finally looked up, he was already looking at her, close enough to see that his eyes were not simply dark, as she'd assumed, but a very deep brown with something warmer underneath. "Miss Calloway," he said, very quietly. "Your Grace," she said. Then, from downstairs, a door. Cecily's voice in the entrance hall, bright and carrying. "James? James, are you home?" They moved at the same time, naturally, unhurried. Vivian picked up her pincushion. The Duke sat back. The chair was just a chair again. But her hand was warm where his had been. And she didn't look at him again for the rest of the afternoon, because she already knew what she would see. She didn't go looking for trouble. Trouble had a way of finding you perfectly well on its own. But there was a difference between trouble finding you and trouble standing directly in front of you while you did nothing, and Vivian had never been good at the second one. It started with a button. She had gone to Hartley's on a Monday morning to collect a trim order when she heard a voice she half recognized. Two women near the window, looking at lace samples. One of them she didn't know. Young, pretty, a little pale, the kind of pale that came from not sleeping well. The other was Mrs. Hartwell. Mrs. Hartwell was saying, in a low but perfectly audible voice, "He'll make the announcement after the Weston wedding. Once that business is dealt with, everything moves forward." That business. Cecily. Cecily, who was 8 weeks from her wedding. Cecily, who had said, "Maybe it's gossip," in a voice that had hoped very much that it was. Vivian paid for her trim and walked out onto Bond Street. She stood in the cold October air for a moment. Then she made a decision. It took her 4 days. She was not a spy. She was a seamstress. What she had was a sharp eye, a good memory, and 20 years of moving through London in the particular invisible way that tradespeople did, present in rooms, overlooked in rooms, overhearing things that the room's occupants would never have said if they'd remembered she was there. She used all of it. By Thursday, she had 3 things. A note passed between Lord Ashby and Miss Hartwell at a concert. She hadn't intercepted it, but she'd watched it pass, and she'd watched Miss Hartwell's face when she read it, and that face had said everything about a woman who believed she was promised something. A conversation, overheard at a dressmaker's, between 2 women who spoke about the Hartwell-Ashby understanding as established fact. "Everyone knows it's been 2 years, poor girl's been waiting." And a letter. Not stolen, she would not steal, but Miss Hartwell had been at Hartley's again on Wednesday, had set her reticule down, and it had fallen, and Vivian had helped gather the contents, and for approximately 10 seconds she had held a folded note in Lord Ashby's handwriting that began, "My dearest E," and ended, "Your patience will not go unrewarded. The situation resolves itself in November." November. 1 month after the wedding. She had handed it back without expression and walked away. But she had seen it. She went to Weston House on Friday afternoon, not for a fitting. She asked for the Duke. The butler gave her a look. She sat down in the entrance hall with her hands folded in her lap and waited. 20 minutes, deliberate, she suspected. Then she was shown to the formal study, a room with a desk between them. "Miss Calloway, this is unexpected." "I know. I apologize for coming without notice." She sat without being asked. "I need to tell you something about Lord Ashby, and I need you to actually listen, which I understand may require some effort." A pause. "That's a remarkable opening," he said. "It's a remarkable situation." He set down his papers, sat. "Go on." She told him everything. Cleanly, in order, without dramatics. She watched his face move through a tension, focus, a tightening around the eyes. When she finished, the study was quiet. "You're describing overheard conversations and a letter you glanced at for 10 seconds, he said. "Yes." none of which you can produce. No. And you expect me to act on this? I expect you to investigate, which you have the means to do and I don't. He stood, moved to the window. She waited. Why? He said, with his back to her. You're a seamstress. You have a commission. The dress is nearly finished. In 8 weeks, you'll be paid and go back to Clerkenwell. He turned around. Why does this concern you? She looked at him. Because I won't let Cecily be left the way I was left, she said. It came out quieter than she intended, more naked. He went very still. My father, whoever my father was, he knew I existed. He chose not to know me. My mother spent 19 years raising me alone and never once complained, but I saw what it cost her. She kept her voice even. Cecily thinks she is building something real. She trusts this man, and he is standing at an altar with 2 women and only one of them knows it. She met his eyes. I won't watch that happen. The study was absolutely silent. She saw it, what her words had done to him, moving across his face slowly like weather. Not just the information about Ashby, the other part, the way I was left, the parallel she hadn't meant to draw quite so clearly, Beaumont abandoning her mother, Charlotte abandoning him. Both of them left, both of them carrying it still. He looked away first, one hand against the window frame, his back to her. When he turned around, his face was resolved. I'll look into it, properly. I have a man who handles these matters discreetly. A pause. If what you've described is accurate, it's accurate. He looked at her. Believed her. Then Ashby will not marry my sister. Simply. Finally.
It happened the following Tuesday. Vivienne wasn't there. She heard about it afterward from Cecily, in fragments, over an emotional hour in the sitting room. The Duke had moved quickly. His man found letters, a formal record of the Hartwell-Ashby understanding, witnesses confirming the arrangement predated Cecily's courtship by over a year, all of it in 4 days, which told Vivienne that the Duke, when he decided to act, acted decisively. He had confronted Ashby privately first, given him the chance to withdraw quietly. Ashby had denied everything and threatened to make a scene. The scene happened at the Carrington dinner, attended by approximately 40 of London's most attentive people. By the fish course, Lord Ashby had left the table. By the pudding, everyone knew why. By Wednesday morning, London knew. Cecily cried, but not, said Vivienne, the cries of a broken heart. They were the cries of humiliation, of anger, of a woman who had trusted something and been made to look foolish. I knew, Cecily kept saying. I knew and I didn't want to know. That's different from not knowing, Vivienne said. Is it? Yes. One is blindness. The other is hope. She handed her fresh tea. Hope is not a failing, Cecily. Cecily looked at her, red-eyed, undone, and underneath all of it, Vivienne could see it, something that looked quietly like relief. James said it was you, Cecily said, that you brought it to him. He sounded, she paused. He sounded different when he talked about it. I don't know how to explain it, just different. Vivienne looked at the fire. Drink your tea, she said. She was leaving that evening, coat on, case in hand, when she found him in the entrance hall, standing near the door, like he'd been waiting, or like he'd happened to be passing, or some combination of both that he could deny if pressed. Thank you, he said. Just that, no elaboration. The same way he'd said, I'm sorry about your mother. 3 words, no fuss. She looked at him. This man who had stepped in front of her in a drawing room and listened across a desk and moved heaven and earth in 4 days for his sister, who carried his father's guilt like a stone in his chest, who had laughed, really laughed, exactly once in her presence. She's going to be all right, Vivienne said. Cecily, she's stronger than she looks. I know, he said. She gets it from somewhere." And he looked at her when he said it, just briefly, before looking away. Vivian picked up her case and walked out the front door, into the cold London evening, where the lamps were just coming on and the street smelled like coal smoke and autumn. And she walked the whole way home to Clerkenwell because she still wasn't spending sixpence on a cab. But she was smiling. Just a little. Just the whole way home.
London talked. This was not surprising. London always talked, but usually it was about someone else, some other family, some other scandal. This time it was about them. Vivian heard it first from her neighbor, Mrs. Pell, who appeared at the shop door on a Wednesday morning with a basket of eggs she didn't need to deliver personally. "There's talk," Mrs. Pell said. "There's always talk," Vivian said, not looking up. "About you. About you and the Duke of Weston." Vivian looked up. "Someone saw him defend you at Lady Pembroke's. Someone else saw you arrive at the house on a day with no fitting. People are connecting things. People always connect things regardless of whether there are things to connect. Vivian, I'm a seamstress finishing a commission, that is all." Mrs. Pell looked at her for a long, unconvinced moment. "Of course it is," she said, in a tone that meant the opposite, and left. By Friday, 2 clients had canceled appointments. No explanations, these things were never explained, just brief, polite notes. Vivian read them, set them on the counter, and went back to the beating. But she felt it, that particular chill, the one that reminded her of the terms of her existence. She was tolerated when she was useful and invisible. She was not tolerated when she became visible for the wrong reasons. She knew this. She had always known this. She just hadn't, until recently, had quite so much to lose. The Dowager Duchess of Weston arrived on a Saturday morning without warning. Just a carriage that stopped outside at 11 o'clock, and a woman who stepped out of it with the air of someone who did not send notes ahead because notes implied the possibility of refusal. The Dowager was perhaps 60, tall, with the Duke's dark eyes and considerably less ambiguity about how she used them. She looked around the shop once, dresses, fabrics, the sewing machine in the corner, with the brief, comprehensive assessment of a woman cataloging a place she had no intention of returning to. "Miss Calloway," she said. "Your Grace?" "Sit down, please." Polite, not a request. "I'll be direct. My son has shown you a particular attention that has not gone unnoticed. I don't know the nature of that attention, and I don't need to. What I need is for it to stop." She folded her hands in her lap. "You are clearly an intelligent woman, capable. I have no quarrel with your ability. I have a quarrel with your ambition." "I haven't expressed any ambition," Vivian said. "You don't need to. You simply need to exist in my son's vicinity, and ambition is attributed to you." Her voice was not unkind. That was almost the worst part. She wasn't being cruel. She was being practical. "My son is the Duke of Weston. He has obligations, a position that requires a certain kind of match. You understand this." "I understand it perfectly." "Then you understand that whatever has developed between you cannot continue." She reached into her reticule and placed an envelope on the work table. "For your inconvenience and your discretion." It sat there between them. Vivian looked at it, then at the Dowager. "How much?" she said. "Enough to repair the ceiling," the Dowager said, with a glance at the crack in the plaster, "and then some." Vivian looked at the envelope for a long moment. Then she slid it back across the table. "No, thank you," she said. "Miss Calloway, I'm not here for your son's money or his attention or his name. I'm here to finish a dress. Quiet, clear. You don't need to buy my discretion. I have my own." A silence. The Dowager looked at her for a long moment, those dark eyes, the Duke's eyes, reading her the way her son read her, and something moved across her face that wasn't quite respect, but lived just next door to it. She stood. "You're very sure of yourself," she said. I've been told that before. By James, I imagine. A pause at the door. She looked back once. He's not like his father, Miss Calloway. Whatever else I've said today, he's not like his father. Something shifted in her voice, briefly. That is not nothing. Then she left. Vivian sat at her work table for a long time after. She wasn't sure if she felt strong or just tired. Perhaps both. He came on Monday. She heard the front door, came out expecting a client, and found the Duke of Weston standing in the middle of her shop in his good coat, like a very serious oil painting that had accidentally wandered into the wrong room. "My mother came to see you," he said. She did. She told him all of it, kept her voice factual. The way she'd told him about Ashby across his desk. She watched his face move through a tightening of the jaw, controlled anger, and something underneath that looked like embarrassment on behalf of someone she loved, even when they made it difficult. "I'm sorry," he said. She had no right. She had every right. From where she stands, she was protecting her family. Vivian looked at the shop. The dresses, the sewing machine, everything her mother had built and she had kept. She's not wrong either. He went very still. "You're telling me my mother is right. I'm telling you she's not wrong. Those are not the same thing. They're close enough." He crossed the shop in 4 steps, not fast, not dramatic, just direct, and stopped in front of her. Close. The way the chair had made them close that afternoon in the sewing room, except this time there was no accident about it. "Look at me," he said. She looked at him. "She is wrong." Quietly, absolutely. Not about the world. The world is exactly as she describes it, but she is wrong about what I want. She cannot tell me what I want. She has been trying my whole life, and she is wrong about it now. Vivian's chest did something complicated. James? His name. She'd never said it before. It came out before she could stop it, and she saw him register it, a small, involuntary thing. "Don't," he said, gently. "Don't tell me to be sensible. I have been sensible for 4 years. It has not recommended itself." She looked at him, at this man who had been left and built his walls and sat in a library at midnight and told her the truth about his father and stepped in front of her in a drawing room with 40 people watching. She had been left too. She knew what it did to a person. She also knew, underneath all the sensible things she'd been telling herself, that this was not nothing. It had never been nothing. His hand came up and tucked a loose strand of hair back from her face, gently, carefully, like something he'd been thinking about for a while, and then stayed there, at her jaw. She let him. For a long moment she just let him, and let herself, and let the shop be quiet, and the street go about its business, and all the practical, unsolvable facts of their situation exist exactly as they were. Then she leaned her head very slightly against his hand. It was a small thing. It was not a small thing at all. "I don't know how this works," she said. Honest, entirely honest. "Neither do I," he said. "I thought we might figure it out." "That is a terrible plan," she said. "I know," he said. And she almost smiled, and he saw it. And the hand at her jaw was warm and steady and not going anywhere. The letter came on a Thursday. Not cream paper, not a wax seal, just ordinary white paper, the handwriting of a man who had learned to write for precision rather than impression. "Miss Calloway, my name is Edmund Farrow. I am a solicitor, formerly in the employ of Lord Aldrich Beaumont of Winthrop, now deceased. A matter of some importance has arisen regarding his estate and a document he left in my keeping. I would be grateful if you could attend my offices at your earliest convenience. The matter concerns you directly." Vivian read it twice, set it down, picked up her needle, set the needle back down. She read it a third time. Then she put on her coat and went. Pharaoh's office was 3 flights up in a narrow street off the Strand, small, the kind of office that had accumulated paper for decades and made peace with it long ago. Pharaoh himself was older than she'd expected, 70s, white-haired, with the careful eyes of a man who had kept other people's secrets so long it had become his natural condition. Lord Beaumont died 8 months ago, quietly. He had been living abroad for some years, in poor circumstances, largely alone. Before he died, he made a will. He had very little left to leave, but there was one matter he was insistent upon. He opened the folder. He had been made aware of your existence, of your mother. He was given a letter. He never replied, Vivian said. No. Pharaoh looked at her steadily. I won't make excuses for him. He was not a brave man, but he was a man who at the last wanted to do one right thing. He turned a page. In his will, he formally acknowledged you as his natural daughter. Your name is recorded, legal, witnessed. He slid a document across the desk. And he left you something. She looked at it. Vivian Calloway, natural daughter of Aldrich Francis Beaumont of Wenthorpe. What did he leave? She said. Her voice was steady. She was concentrating very hard on keeping it steady. Not money. There was almost none. The title cannot pass through natural issue, but the acknowledgement, in the old statutes, the old records, it means something. It doesn't make you the Baroness of Wenthorpe, but it makes you, formally and legally, the acknowledged natural daughter of a peer of the realm. He looked at her over his spectacles. In certain circles, Miss Calloway, that is not nothing.
Vivienne looked at the document for a long time. Her name, his name, both on the same piece of paper, in ink that had already dried. He died alone? She said. Yes, in Lisbon, a small house, a housekeeper who was fond of him, but otherwise, yes, alone. My mother wrote to him 3 times, she said, not angry, just saying it, putting it somewhere outside herself. I know, Pharaoh said quietly. He kept the letters. They were among his effects. He hesitated. Would you like them? She hadn't expected that. Yes, she said. Please. She walked home. She didn't mean to. It was a long way. The sky was threatening rain, but her feet just kept moving, and she let them. She didn't cry. She kept waiting for it, feeling it building somewhere behind her ribs, but it didn't come. She just walked, with the folder under her arm, through streets that had no idea anything had changed. She thought about her mother. 19 years of silence, not bitterness, not complaint, just getting on with things. She will want for nothing I can provide. And she hadn't. She truly hadn't. She thought about a man in Lisbon she would never meet. Charming, careless, not brave enough at the important moments. A man who had kept 3 unanswered letters until he died. She thought about her name on that document, still Calloway. She would always be Calloway, her mother's name, the name on the shop door. But underneath it now, in a solicitor's filing cabinet, something else. A door she'd never known was there, slightly ajar. She didn't know how she felt about it. She went to Weston House. He was in the library. Of course he was. The door was open. He was at the desk, writing, but he looked up immediately when she appeared in the doorway, and something in her face made him put the pen down without a word. Sit down, he said. The same words she had said to him that afternoon in the sewing room. She noticed that he remembered. She sat in the chair by the fire and set the folder on her knee. She told him everything. Pharaoh, the office, the will, the document, the letters her mother had written that a man in Lisbon had kept until he died. Plainly, in order. No dramatics. When she finished, the room was quiet. He looked at her with attention, with the particular focused quality he had when something mattered to him. Not pity. She was grateful again for the absence of pity.
"How are you?" he said. 3 words, the right 3 words. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I've been walking for an hour trying to work that out." He let the silence sit. He was good at that. "He kept her letters," she said quietly. "That's the part I keep coming back to. He never answered them. He did nothing for her whole life, for my whole life, but he kept them." She paused. "I don't know what to do with that." "You don't have to do anything with it, not today." She looked down at the folder. "He acknowledged me, legally. My name is in the records." She looked up. "It doesn't change anything. I am the same person I was yesterday. I am my mother's daughter. I make dresses. I have a shop with a crack in the ceiling. A piece of paper doesn't change any of that." "No, it doesn't." "So it means nothing." "Vivian." She stopped. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "It doesn't change who you are. You're right about that. You were always exactly who you are, with or without that document. But it changes other people. It changes what they can say, what grounds they have to—" He stopped, chose the words carefully. "It changes the conversation." She looked at him. They both knew which conversation he meant. His mother, the drawing rooms, Lady Pembroke's, the 2 canceled appointments, and all the careful architecture of a world with very specific opinions about which doors were for whom. "It changes things for other people," she said slowly. "Not for me." "No," he said, "not for you. You were never the problem." Something moved through his voice, quiet and certain. "You were never the problem." Rain started against the window, soft and steady the way London rain often did, not dramatic, just persistent. Vivian looked at the folder on her knee. Her mother had written 3 letters and received nothing, had built a life anyway, a good life, a sewing machine and a shop, and a daughter who knew how to hold her chin level. She thought about a library at midnight and a hand at her jaw, and "I thought we might figure it out." "I'm not going to become someone different because of this," she said. "I know," he said. "I don't want someone different." She looked at him. He looked back, steady and certain, and she thought, not for the first time, that whatever walls this man had built, she had somehow ended up on the inside of them, without quite knowing when it had happened. "It still doesn't solve anything," she said quietly. "No," he agreed, "but it's a start." Outside, London went on in the rain. Inside, the fire burned. Neither of them moved to leave. The dress was finished on a Wednesday. Vivian hung it on the frame and stepped back and looked at it for a long time. Ivory silk, pale gold trim, the beading catching the morning light the way she'd known it would. Simple lines, nothing fussy. The kind of dress that didn't need to shout because it knew exactly what it was. Her best work, she was certain of that. Cecily cried when she saw it, happy tears, both hands pressed to her mouth. Her lady's maid cried too, which set Cecily off again. Vivian stood to one side and let it happen, which was the correct thing to do when a dress did what a dress was supposed to do. "It's perfect," Cecily kept saying. "Vivian, it's perfect." "I know," Vivian said, which made Cecily laugh through her tears. She should have left after that. Commission complete, dress delivered, work done. She should have packed her case and gone back to Clerkenwell and her ordinary life, which was waiting patiently as ordinary lives did. She was in the entrance hall, coat on, case in hand, when she heard him. "Miss Calloway." He was at the top of the stairs, not coming down, just standing there, one hand on the banister, looking at her with an expression she'd learned to read over the past weeks. The careful face, but underneath it something less careful. Something that had been building for a while and had decided today was the day. "Would you come to the library?" he said. "Please." She looked at the front door, then at him. She set her case down.
The library was the same as always, warm, quiet, the good fire. She stood near the window, coat still on. Something told her to keep the coat on. He stood in the middle of the room, clearly having thought about what he wanted to say. "The dress is finished," he said. "It is." "Which means your commission is complete, which means you have no particular reason to come back here." "No, I don't." He looked at her. The fire talked. The clock ticked through several seconds. "I don't want you to not come back," he said. It was possibly the most complicated sentence she'd ever heard. She almost smiled. She didn't. "James, let me say it properly." He moved to the other window, looked out for a moment, then turned back. "I have been managing. For 4 years. Everything at the correct distance, everything in its correct place. And then you came through my front door and refused to use the service entrance and told me I was just a title. And you sat in that chair at midnight and talked about your mother. And you brought me evidence about Ashby and said, I need you to actually listen. And I—" He stopped. Ran a hand briefly through his hair, which she had never seen him do. It made him look younger. "I am not managing anymore," he said. "That's what I'm trying to say. Badly." Vivian's hands in her coat pockets were very still. "I know what the world looks like," he continued. "I'm not asking you to pretend it's different. My mother's concerns are not imaginary, but I am asking you to stay." More quietly, "I'm asking you to marry me." The room went very still. Vivian looked at him. She had known, somewhere underneath the sensible things she kept telling herself, that it was coming. She just hadn't known what she would do when it arrived. Standing by the window in her coat, she discovered she still didn't know. "Why now?" she said. "The dress is done. My commission is finished. The whole of London is talking." She held his gaze. "Is this a resolution? The document, Beaumont, the bloodline? Does this feel like a solution to a problem that's become inconvenient?" His jaw tightened. "That's not—" "I need to ask it," she said, not harshly, "because if what you're offering is a way to quiet the conversation, to make things neat, I don't want it. I have managed perfectly well without being anyone's resolution." He stared at her. She stared back. She saw him work through it, the flash of something that might have been anger, then the real thing underneath. "Is that genuinely what you think?" he said quietly. "After all of it?" "I think I don't know," she said, "and I need to know." He crossed the room, not fast, not dramatically, just directly, the way he always moved when he'd made a decision, and stopped in front of her. "Do you want to know what I thought when Beaumont acknowledged you, when suddenly there was a document that changed the optics of everything?" She waited. "I thought, for about 10 seconds, that it was convenient." He held her gaze completely steady. "And then I thought about a woman who walked through my front door because she refused to use the service entrance, who told me I was just a title, who sat across my desk and said I am not a bill to be settled, who smiled the whole way home because Cecily was safe." His voice was quiet but stripped down. "Is that the woman who needs a bloodline to be worth wanting?" He took a breath. "I am not asking you because of Beaumont. I am not asking because London is talking or because my mother is difficult. I am asking because I have not been able to think clearly since the night I found you in this room with a dying candle looking at the lapels on that portrait." The walls were completely down now. The woman who will still be in her shop at midnight after the commission ends, because the detail matters, because every stitch matters, who has never asked for anything from anyone and never needed to. He held her gaze. The woman who, when I asked her to come to the library, put down her case and came, not because she had to, because she chose to. Vivian's chest was doing the complicated thing, worse than before. She believed him. That was the thing. She believed him the way she believed a well-made seam, because it held, because nothing in it was false, because you could feel the quality of it. And that was exactly the problem, because believing him wasn't the same as knowing what to do with it. She stepped back. One step. He let her. "I need to think," she said. Something moved across his face. He kept it controlled, but she saw it. "I'm not saying no," she said, more quickly than she'd intended. "I just need to think." He nodded, slowly. His hands were very still at his sides. She picked up her case, wrapped her coat more closely, looked at him one more time, standing in the library, beside the chair that had become her chair, in front of the fire that was always burning when she arrived, and something pulled in her chest so strongly it almost made her reach for the doorframe. She didn't. "Good night, James," she said. "Good night, Vivian," he said quietly. She walked out of the library, down the stairs, across the marble floor, past the portraits, past the chandelier to the front door. She opened it herself. She walked out into the cold evening, coal smoke, London going about its enormous, indifferent business, and down the front steps and along the pavement, and she didn't look back. She walked all the way home to Clerkenwell, and for the first time in all those weeks of walking back from Weston House, she didn't smile. She thought. 3 weeks passed. Vivian counted them without meaning to, the way you counted things you were trying not to think about, which was its own kind of thinking about them. 3 weeks of ordinary mornings, ordinary clients, ordinary work. The sewing machine in the corner, her mother's machine, heavy and solid and reliable. She fixed the ceiling. She'd been putting it off for 2 years. She called the man, had it done, stood in the empty shop afterward looking at the fresh plaster and felt something she couldn't quite name. Not closure, just one thing finished. She took on new commissions, the ordinary fabric of work which had always been enough before and was still good, just quieter than it had been. The particular quietness of a room where something used to be. She didn't go to Weston House. He didn't write. She told herself this was the right shape of things. She told herself in the morning over tea, and in the evening over the same cup gone cold, and in the hours between when she was supposed to be sleeping and wasn't. She was very convincing. Mostly. Cecily came on a Tuesday. No carriage. She simply appeared at the shop door in a plain coat, looking like a woman who had deliberately left the trappings of Weston House behind her for the afternoon. She bought a pair of gloves she almost certainly didn't need, and sat in the customer chair for an hour and talked about everything except her brother, which meant she talked about almost nothing else. She started, once, then stopped. "You don't have to," Vivian said. "I know." Cecily looked at her gloves. "He's been riding early in the mornings. He only does that when he's working through something." A pause. "He doesn't say anything. He never says anything, but I know." Vivian kept her eyes on her needle. "He's all right?" she said, meaning it as a question. "He's James," Cecily said, which was its own answer. She left an hour later, kissed Vivian on the cheek in a way that felt like a message she was delivering on someone's behalf, and walked back out into the afternoon. Vivian sat at her work table for a while after, not sewing. Then she sewed. She was thinking about him on the morning the door opened. This was not unusual. She had been thinking about him with some regularity for 3 weeks, which was inconvenient but apparently unavoidable. She was thinking about the library and the chair, and "I thought we might figure it out." And then, for the first time, clearly, a thought arrived fully formed, the way the right solution to a difficult seam sometimes did. Ordinary wasn't enough anymore. It had stopped being enough approximately the night she'd sat in the library with a dying candle and told a man about her mother's sewing machine. She had been treating it like a problem to be solved, like a seam to be checked, like something that needed to be correct before she could proceed. But the truth was simpler and considerably more frightening. She wanted him. Not his name,
Not his house, not the document in Pharaoh's filing cabinet, just the man who had laughed exactly once in her presence and kept a library warm and stepped in front of her in a drawing room without being asked. That was the truth. It had been the truth for a while. She had just been very busy not looking directly at it. She set down her needle. The shop bell rang. He was standing in the doorway. No good coat, a plain, dark one, the kind you wore when you weren't going somewhere to be looked at. Hair slightly windblown like he'd walked and not thought about it. He looked, she thought, more like himself than she had ever seen him, less assembled, less managed. Just James. In his right hand, held slightly out, almost offering, almost awkward, entirely unlike him, was a small pair of scissors, silver-handled, the ones she used for detail work, the ones she'd had since her mother died, that had somehow ended up left behind in Weston House. She looked at the scissors. She looked at him. "I found these in the sewing room," he said. "I wondered where those were," she said. He looked around the shop. The dresses on their frames, the bolts of fabric, the sewing machine in the corner, the fresh plaster on the ceiling. He looked at all of it the way he looked at everything, carefully, missing nothing. His eyes came back to her. "I used the front door," he said. It was a quiet thing to say, small even, but they both knew what it meant. All of it, the whole history of it, from the first morning what a footman had pointed toward the service entrance and she had walked up the front steps anyway, the full circle of it. The fact that he had come here, to her, on her ground, without the house and the title and the armor of all of it. Just himself, at her front door, with her scissors in his hand. Vivian looked at him for a long moment. And then she laughed. A real one, not the almost smile she'd been allowing herself. A real laugh, surprised out of her, warm and genuine, the kind that changed her whole face. She saw what it did to him, the softening, the man underneath the Duke surfacing completely. He smiled, fully, the rarest thing she had ever seen in that face. "There it is," he said quietly. "Don't make it a thing," she said, still smiling. "It's absolutely a thing," he said. She shook her head, but she was still smiling, and they both knew it. She came around the work table, crossed the shop toward him, not fast, not hesitant, just steady, the way she did everything important. She stopped in front of him, and he looked down at her, and the scissors were still between them, still waiting. She took them. Her fingers closed around the silver handles, warm from his hand. She looked up at him. "You could have sent them," she said. "I could have," he agreed. "You walked here yourself, from Mayfair? It's not that far." She looked at him. He looked back. The shop was quiet around them, the ordinary, good quiet of a working room. "James," she said. "Vivian," he said. "I've been thinking," she said. "For 3 weeks," he said, not accusing, just noting. "I think slowly about important things." Something moved through his eyes, patient, entirely, completely here. "I don't want to close the shop," she said. "I know," he said. "I would never. I don't want to become someone different. I know. I don't want to stop using the front door." The corner of his mouth moved. "I would be genuinely concerned if you did." She looked at him, at this man she had met at the bottom of a staircase where he had looked through her like furniture, who had sat across from her in firelight and told her the truth about his father, who had stepped in front of her without being asked and laughed, really laughed exactly when she had stopped expecting it. "I don't know how this works," she said. The same words as before, in the sewing room, his hand at her jaw. "You said that before," he said. "It's still true." "I know." Steady, the way he was when something mattered. "I still think we figure it out." She took one step forward, just one, closing the last of the distance, in her own shop, on her own ground, by her own choice. She put her free hand against his chest, flat, steady, and felt him breathe. "All right," she said quietly. His hand came up and covered hers, warm, certain. "All right," he said. Behind them, the front door stood open. She hadn't closed it when he came in. The morning air moved through it gently, cool, clean, carrying the faint sounds of the street, a cart going past, someone calling to someone else, London doing what London always did with complete indifference to the small, important things happening inside its buildings. The door stayed open, not an oversight, not carelessness, just open, the way it had been since the beginning, the way she had made it that first morning, walking up those front steps with her leather case and her mother's scissors and her chin level. She had never needed anyone's permission to walk through a door. She just, finally, had someone to walk through it with.